Hi, this is Helen Robinson with So Kind of Wonderful. I'm happy to be here again with you today working on another quilt tutorial. Today we're doing Chic Kisses. Chic Kisses is based off two traditional designs, either Gypsy Kisses or Pickle Dish. It starts with this basic block, and you can see it has wedge sets here, and we'll walk through how to build those quickly with a chain piecing method, and then building your block and squaring it up. So let's get started building our Chic Kisses block. All right, so let's talk about the Chic Kisses pattern and what actually comes with the pattern. So you get the pattern, and then you get the great cover. It shows you a full picture of the quilt on the back. And with this pattern, you also have a template, because somehow we have to make these little wedges. And I wish there was a way to strip piece wedges. There's really not, so we give you a template. This is also on our webpage. It's under free patterns. It says Chic Kisses template. You can click it and print as many as you want from your computer. In the pattern, let's say you use this, you did something, you didn't mean to cut the last one you had, your printer's not working. We also give you a template in here, just in case, that's my only option. I only need to cut 10 more, and that's what you're down to. So I'm going to show you how I use the template. So the pattern walks you through your wedges pieces, and it says to cut 5 by 9s. And for our design, we're going to make another one of these blocks. We are just using this Kona pepper and Kona silver. So I'm going to layer 2 black pieces and 2 silver pieces, and these are 5 by 9. I'm going to layer those because I'm going to cut 4 layers at a time. And then I took my Chic Kisses template, not the one that came with my pattern. I went to the website, I printed this from the PDF loaded there. And I'm going to place it on my fabric. I cut the sides off, and I'm just going to position it on the fabric. And then I'm going to pin in the center with a little flathead pin. And then I am going to use my rotary cutter and my quick curve ruler to cut these. And I know that paper will dull my blade on my cutter, but it's worth it to me to get these done fast, to cut right through the paper. So that's what I'm doing, because I would rather change a blade than take all day marking it with a pencil and then cutting. So you can see how quickly you get your wedges cut. And then I'm just going to throw away the papers. Then I'm going to separate them. One thing the pattern does indicate is that you want to sew your wedges together with scant 1/4 inch seams. So just note that when you're sewing, make them just a teeny bit skinnier. It just gives you a little bit more leeway when we get down to working with that wedge piece after you've sewn pieces together. All right, so for this we need 11 of these wedges. So I'm going to use 6 of my light ones, and I'm going to use 5 here of the dark ones, because I'm going to start with a light and then end with a dark. And I'm always going to sew with the skinny part, start sewing from the skinny part down. And I'm going to always sew with my light one on the bottom and my dark one on top. And I'm going to sew 5 sets like this. light on the bottom, dark on top, start sewing from the skinny side down. And I'm going to chain piece these. So I'm going to just sew one right after another. Okay, so now I have 3, 4, 5. This is the one I sewed wrong. And you can see what happens when you open it up. All of these are going to open with the light on the one side and the dark on the other, except for this one is in the wrong. So it messes up my light dark pattern. So that's why I knew I sewed that wrong to begin with. So on the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 of them and I'm going to open them up. I'm not pressing yet, and I'm just going to start on the skinny side of the wedge, and I'm going to sew this. And then with this last piece, remember, I have 11 pieces and I need to start with a light and end with a light. So on my last pair, which I have left over, I'm going to add just a single light one. So now I have these 4, and then I have these 4, and I'm staying with my light dark alternating, and then I have this 3-piece. So I'm going to sew the 4 to the 4, sew from the skinny side of your wedge down. So now I have these, and then I'm going to sew this 3-piece onto the end so that I end with a light on the outside. There, so that was a quick way to sew 11 alternating color wedge pieces together, chain piecing them. And when I make this pattern, I actually make it just one of these sections at a time. So that kind of keeps me organized. I also know that all these seams need to press one direction. So if you lay it with your seams up, they all need to go from right to left. This way, you just don't fight the seams later when you're sewing pieces together. The seams will lay down flat for you. So I'm pressing on the back first. Use a little steam. There's a lot of seams, so just be patient and kind of slow. Give it enough time to really set those seams. And then go over to the top. Press. Okay, now we have this really great wedge fan piece. Now for our next step, the pattern shows you this. And here you always want to do whatever's in the pattern, set up your station so that the picture looks like what the pattern is showing you. So we're on this step. What we're trying to do is not everybody's going to sew all these seams the same width apart, even though we say scant 1/4 inch. It's going to be different for everybody. So we're trying to create a uniform measurement here. So what I'm doing, my ruler is 7 inches wide. This is the 3.5 inch mark here. And I'm putting the points of the ruler down here, just on the edge of the block, and I'm centering it here. This is going to at least give everybody the same starting point of 7 inches here. Then I'm going to take my rotary cutter and trim these 2 points off. So that's this step, sample 2. Now we're going to go to sample 3. For sample 3, we actually just take our quick curve ruler. You just created a new point when you cut off that, which is right here and here. So we're going to take our ruler, put the curve cut out on those 2 new points you just created. Cut in your curved slot with your rotary cutter. Now you get this. Now this is consistent. We knew we got this to 7 inches wide, and then we cut it with the quick curve ruler cutout slot. Now we're going to turn the page on our pattern. And here you can see sample 4 tells you to fold this in half. And then we're going to measure and mark 3.5 inches. So I'm going to use my cutting mat. So I folded it in half. I'm going to measure 1, 2, 3.5. I'm going to make a little mark with my pen. And then on the other side, I need to mark 4.5 inches. So use your mat, 1, 2, 3, 4.5. Take our quick curve ruler, and I'm going to leave this positioned here because I know that's on black and it's hard to see. And I'm going to put that curve cutout on that 4.5 inch mark, and then over here on my 3.5 inch mark, I'm putting the other side of the curve cutout. It doesn't matter if it was here or here, just put the curve cutout over those two marks because the curve doesn't change as long as you're positioning it over those two marks. Use your rotary cutter. You're cutting through a lot of seams, so give it some nice pressure. Cut in there and then open it up. Now we have this really great shape. It'll be consistent as you make all of them. You'll get them all to this same shape. And for our next step here, in sample 6, you're going to be working with your 2x8 pieces of fabric. So 2x8 pieces of fabric. And then we're going to look at your pattern, position your fabric, position the ruler on the fabric the way it shows in your pattern. It says to center the fabric between the 10 and 2 inch line because it's an 8 inch piece of fabric. And then put the left edge of the fabric on this 3 inch line. Now I'm going to hold my ruler still and use my regular rotary cutter and cut in my curve cutout. This is your discard. And then this is your piece that is going to, this is your B piece, and it's going to be sewn right here to your wedge. Now we need to get our outside piece also. And our outside piece, at the beginning of the pattern, it says to cut 10 by 10s from your background. So this is a 10 inch by 10 inch square, and then I cut it in half diagonally. It tells me to fold it. And I'm just going to finger press so it'll hold its shape right here on sample 7. And I'm going to use the grid on my mat, and I'm going to, I put one point here, I put it down here on the line on my mat, and then I've got the fold going across. On your pattern, it says to measure and mark 1.5 inches down from this point. And then here it says measure and mark 2.5 inches from this point over. So we have our mark and our mark. Now we're on sample 8 in your pattern. Go ahead and position your quick curve ruler so that your marks are under your curve cutout. Use your rotary cutter. Discard this piece. And now you have your C piece. So now we're going to sew A, B, and C together. Our first step is to sew B to A. Here's our concave. This is our convex. We're always going to put our concave on the bottom. Here, the pattern says to match your ends. No, the pattern says to match the ends, or that seems a little long. I know that if I have about, depending on your wedges might have been, I didn't sew a very scant seam, so you can see that my wedges are kind of close. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail, a 1/4 inch tail. But we gave you plenty of fabric there so that if yours are really wide, go ahead and match your ends there. So concave on the bottom, convex on top, hold the fabric, 1 piece in each hand. Sew a couple anchor stitches, and then go ahead and bring those 2 curved edges slowly together as it feeds under the presser foot. I'm really trying not to pull, rather just bring together. There you can see how nicely that worked. I'm going to press it away from my wedges, so I'm going to press it towards B. For this, I can just press right on top. I could press from the back too if I want, but it was laying down nicely. Now we're going to sew this unit onto C. And here we're always going to put the concave on the bottom, and we're going to put the convex on top. And for here, if I lay this out, I can see I have a little bit more than a 1/2 inch. If you have more than a 1/2 inch, then you can leave a little bit of a tail. If you have a 1/2 inch on each side, then you want to match your ends. I have a little bit more, so I'm going to leave just a little 1/8 inch tail, and you can see concave on the bottom, convex on top. Go to your sewing machine. Remember, sew some anchor stitches first, and then hold the fabric 1 piece in each hand. And I'm just easing that together. Notice that my seams are laying down flat, and they're feeding nicely. I'm not fighting them as they go under the foot. That's because we pressed our seams all the same direction. There, you can see how nicely that is. Here was my little finger press fold. You can see how it almost got centered perfectly on my center wedge as I went around. Okay, we're going to press one more time. Here, I'm just going to press on top. I'm pressing away from my wedges. My seam, that's how it wants to lay down. I don't want to fight it. I've got a lot of seams in there. If you fight that too much and try to turn that the other direction, it's just going to eat up a lot of fabric and you'll be frustrated. You can see how nice that worked out. Okay, now we worked on getting this wedge section to a uniform shape. Now we need to, even though it looks pretty square, we're going to use our square ruler, and we are actually going to square this up a little bit more. I'm going to do it this way so you can see. All right, we're right here in our pattern on sample 10. Sample 10 says that this seam right here, this curved seam where my purple meets my silver, I want to put my 5-inch mark on those two seams. Here and here. And then look over here. Make sure that you're not like this, where you're going to have a gap down here because you're not catching all the fabric. You need just a little bit of an overlap of fabric here and here to trim off. I'm not left-handed, so I turned it around so I'd be nice and safe trimming this. Trim, trim. And because I use my square ruler, I know those are straight. And I'll tell you why that's important. Because our next step, right over here on sample 11, we're going to sew on our setting triangles. And our setting triangles are square. They were 5 1/4 inches that we cut diagonally. And so when I lay this on here, you're going to see it matches up nicely with that edge, but this seems off. But we know this is square, so we're going to line it up with this side. And then over here on this one, the same thing. Now, in the pattern, one of the things you have to be aware of is you're going to make these units. And the pattern is designed to have squares here when you're done. If I sew the yellow here and the purple here, you can see I'm going to get triangles, which is just fine. It's a different design element. You could do that, and you would end up with a pinwheel here. The pattern says to actually alternate these so that every other one you actually sew. So one time you sew them with the gold on the right and the purple on the left. The next time you do it the opposite. That's so that you can have a square here when we sew them together. So I'm just pointing that out. If you end up with pinwheels, now you'll know why. Which pinwheels would be great too. All right, so here you can see that this is going to end up being a, we've got the gold where it should be, and we've got the plum on this side. And so here when we sew these together, our setting squares, we sew together here. And so if we press the seam open, it will make that an easier join. So we're going to press these seams open. Again, we don't always press every seam open, but you get to a point where you have so much bulk, or you know your next step, you're joining seams, that pressing open can be a really good option. Traditionally, when people hand piece their quilts ages ago, they pressed the seams to the side because it gave the seam more strength. Now that we use sewing machines, and then we're top stitching with sewing machines also when we're quilting, I feel like pressing seams open has become a viable option without weakening your seams. All right, now we have our nice triangle piece, but it's not square. So we're going to use a long straight edge ruler, and the pattern shows you that you're going to position it in sample 12. Position it so that the 1/4 inch line is on this intersection right here. Because when we sew, we want to sew on this intersection so that we get a nice little oval in the middle of our Chic Kisses blocks. So I'm putting the 1/4 inch mark on that intersection here and here. And then you can see I'm going to trim all of this off. Now, I'm going to take the block I made previously, and can you see how those match and that matches? So I'm going to pin those intersections, pin those. And then I'll just put a couple more pins in down here because I don't want it to shift on me as I'm sewing this fairly long seam. And even in the center, sometimes that can shift. Now we'll see how good of a job I did. That's pretty nice. That point comes here and here. And you can see I'm really going to want to press this seam open. I'm going to use a little spray starch. The spray starch I like to use is Best Press. Everybody has their favorite smell. This is linen. That's pretty amazing. Lavender's always good. I'm going to spray that with a little starch. I'm going to finger press it first because I have a lot going on here at this intersection. I've got wedges I sewed together. I've got that curved seam. Take it over, use a little steam. Press on the back first. And then on your front, turn it over. And if you get some fullness, because you have a lot of seams in this little center section, a little bit of spray starch. And if I had a towel, and if I folded a towel and put it underneath there, it really helps that fullness to not go wrinkly on me. You can see how nicely that came together. Looks really good. Now we have one more step. We need to square up our block, because even though it looks good, we want it to match with the block that we make next. So we're going to use our square up ruler, and we are going to square this to, we are squaring it to 11 3/4 and 11 3/4 or 12 by 12. So here is where everybody is a little bit different sewer. And I'm going to give you some things to look at when you square up your block. So you're going to check and see, first of all, check to see how big your block is. All right, I could actually do, could I do 12 by 12? I could. I have made this block a lot. You saw from my first example, I've made a whole quilt. I've made a lot of other quilts. I know I sew my seams a little bit large. So 11 3/4 actually works better for me. And on my square up ruler, I actually have some red lines right here that says Kisses. I wrote on here with a Sharpie, meaning this block. So I know for me, I'm going to do 11 3/4. So 11 3/4, half of that. So that would mean I want you have to figure out how big your setting squares are going to be then. If you're going to do 11 3/4, then you want 3.5 inches from this outside point over to here, and 3.5 inches from here down to here. Now let's go down to the other side and make sure that's going to work. And then let's go back to our corner, because our corner here is 11 3/4. So if we are here, go back 1, 2, 3.5. Let's go back again. 1, 2, 3.5. So the goal is to get 3.5 from this corner to that setting seam, 3.5 from here to here, here to here, and here to here. That way, when you sew your blocks together, your setting seams are going to match. Now, another thing I'm going to have you look at right here. You can see I have about 1/4 and another 1/8 from the edge of my block into this curved wedge set. Over here, the same thing. I have 1/4 plus a little bit. Down here, I have just 1/4, which is just fine. Here, I have 1/4. In fact, a smidgen less than 1/4. But that's okay, because this is what it's going to do. This is what we're talking about here. And sometimes you'll have a little bit skinnier one, a little bit wider, but the effect works because this is the seam intersection that you're going to notice when you've sewn it up. So let's go ahead and square this block. It's where I want it to be. If I was making a full quilt of this, I would make my blocks, get them to this point before I square anything up. Because you want to audition all your blocks and see if they're all going to square up to the same size. And notice that I had my diagonal line going along the center as close as possible. It's more important that your setting square seams match than your diagonal line be perfectly on the center of your block. Trim two sides, rotate, because you're going to notice the seams where they come together on those squares more than the diagonal line. Okay, so 11 3/4 here. I'm still good here. I'm really close to my 3.5. I might give me just a little bit. Trim off. Now we're back to our Chic Kisses block. It looks great. You can see here I've got enough so that when I sew this wedge set to the next one, it's just going to join, which is nice. That'll be fine here. This one I have a little bit more, but when you get done, the overall effect will look great. And that is our Chic Kisses block.